The person who is supposed to love you unconditionally can also be the one who cuts you the deepest. On my wedding day, my own mother handed me a beautiful gift, and hidden inside was the cruelest message I'd ever received. She thought she could break me in front of the world. She never expected my real family to be there to fight back. My name is Abigail, and this is my story. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reached. Don't forget to subscribe and join me on this journey where the unspoken feelings of the past finally find their voice. Sometimes, even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. The silence in the hotel suite was louder than any explosion I'd ever heard. It was the kind of absolute quiet that presses in on you, broken only by the soft, rhythmic tick of a gilded clock on the mantelpiece. I stood in the center of the room in a simple silk robe a ghost caught between two futures. To my left, hanging from a valet stand, was my army service uniform. The deep blue fabric was pressed to a razor's edge, the golden braids on the sleeves gleaming softly. On each shoulder sat a single silver star, polished to a mirror shine. It was more than a uniform. It was a map of my life, each ribbon and insignia a testament to a place I had been, a trial I had endured. It was my skin. To my right, draped on a mannequin like a pale accusation, was the Vera Wang gown. It was a magnificent creation of lace and satin cascading to the floor in a cloud of white. It was the dress my mother, Catherine Bishop, had sent over that morning without a word. It was beautiful, expensive, and a complete stranger to me. The clock ticked on. I was a general trained to make life or death decisions in seconds. But here in this opulent room, I was paralyzed. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk, a sharp, intrusive sound. I already knew who it was. The message was from my mother. It was brief, precise, and perfectly Catherine. The car will arrive in 1 hour. I trust you'll make the choice that honors the Bishop name. Not an order, not a threat. Just a statement, weighted with the full force of her expectations. The Bishop name. It was her favorite weapon, the one she wielded with surgical precision. I stared at the message, the words blurring. Suddenly, it wasn't a hotel suite in D.C. anymore. It was the family library 15 years ago. I was 18, my hair in a ponytail, my hands clutching the acceptance letter from West Point, as if it were a holy scripture. My father, a good man who had long ago ceded all domestic power to his wife, had a rare, genuine smile on his face. My brother Spencer, already a master of the condescending smirk, at 20 snorted into his book. And then there was my mother. She froze her hand, hovering over a porcelain teacup. A mask of polite interest slipped over her face, but I saw the flicker of horror in her eyes. I braced myself for the storm, for the lecture about tradition, about a woman's place, about the Bishop legacy. But the storm never came. Instead, she placed her teacup down with a delicate click, her smile tightening. Well, she said, her voice smooth as ice, if you must get this phase out of your system, then at least do it with excellence. Make this family proud. Make this family proud. For 15 years, those words had been my northern star. I clung to them through the grueling misery of beast barracks, through the freezing nights in Afghanistan, through the crushing loneliness of command. I believed that if I was just decorated enough, just respected enough, just excellent enough, I could finally win. I believed that her approval was a summit I could conquer if I just climbed high enough. I was a fool. It was never a summit. It was a mirage. The door to the suite opened, and my fiancé, Mike Russo, walked in. He stopped short, his gaze taking in the silent standoff between the uniform and the dress. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the one thing my family had never given me: understanding. He walked over to the valet stand, his own dress uniform making a soft, familiar rustle. He didn't say a word about the gown. He just reached out and gently touched the silver star on my uniform shoulder. "Wear what you earned, Abby," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Wear who you are." His simple validation was a lifeline. I took a deep breath, the knot in my chest loosening just a fraction. But then my phone rang, shattering the moment. The caller ID read Spencer. I hesitated, then answered. "Abby," he began, his voice dripping with the feigned sympathy he used when he was about to move his chess pieces. "I'm trying to run interference here. Mom's a wreck. She's about to have a full-blown meltdown." He sighed, the sound of a martyr bearing a great burden. "Listen to me. Just wear the dress for the ceremony, for everyone's sake. You can change into your outfit for the reception. Don't start a war today. It's not worth it." He made it sound so reasonable. He painted our mother as the fragile victim and me as the aggressor, the selfish daughter intent on ruining everyone's day. It was his favorite tactic, a subtle gaslighting that always left me feeling like the unreasonable one. His words sent me tumbling back again, this time to a crowded hall in the Pentagon a few years prior. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and the weight of history. I was standing on a stage as my new rank was announced, Brigadier General. As the single star was pinned to my shoulder, I scanned the audience. My mother and Spencer were there, looking deeply out of place in their tailored Italian suits. I thought that would be the day. A general at 32. It was excellence. It was achievement. It was everything she'd asked for. After the ceremony, as fellow officers shook my hand, I saw her waiting by an alcove. I excused myself, my heart pounding with a desperate, childish hope. This was it. She pulled me aside, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes weren't proud. They were disturbed. "All these men," she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss, beneath the polite hum of the room, "they salute you. It's unnatural, Abigail. A woman's power should be quiet, graceful. Not this." She gestured vaguely at the star on my shoulder, as if it were a cancerous growth. In that moment, she didn't just dismiss my achievement. She twisted it into something monstrous, a perversion of womanhood. The greatest professional triumph of my life was in her eyes my greatest personal failure. Snapping back to the present, I ended the call with Spencer without another word. The time for debate was over. I walked to the valet stand and began to dress. The familiar ritual calmed me. The crisp shirt, the perfectly knotted tie, the heavy wool of the jacket. With each piece, I felt like I was putting on armor. I felt like myself again. As I was adjusting my collar, I noticed a small, elegant box on the vanity. It was Tiffany blue, tied with a white ribbon. My heart gave a stupid, hopeful lurch. I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a delicate diamond necklace. The card in my mother's perfect looping script read, "A wedding gift." "So you remember that you are more than your accomplishments. You are a bishop." For a second, I let myself hope. Maybe this was it. An olive branch. A silent apology. Maybe she was finally trying to bridge the chasm between us. I lifted the necklace, the diamonds cold against my fingertips. Then I saw it. Tucked beneath the velvet lining was a small folded piece of newsprint. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a clipping from the society pages of the Washington Post. The headline announced the engagement of Spencer Bishop to the daughter of a banking tycoon. The article was a gushing tribute to the powerful union of two of the East Coast's most influential families, a move that would solidify the Bishop legacy for generations to come. The necklace wasn't a peace offering, it was a lesson. It was a condescending pat on the head, a reminder of the soft feminine world I was supposed to inhabit. And the clipping was the final, brutal twist of the knife. It was her showing me what real family honor looked like. It had nothing to do with service or sacrifice. It was about mergers, bloodlines, and money. The cold weight of the clipping in my hand triggered one last memory, the one that had drawn the final battle line. It was the night I came home from my last tour in Afghanistan, my arm in a sling. At dinner, I told them I'd been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. This time, my mother didn't dismiss it. She listened, her face pale, as I reluctantly recounted the story of the ambush, of pulling my wounded soldiers out of a burning vehicle under enemy fire. When I finished, the room was silent. I looked at her, hoping for a flicker of pride. Instead, her eyes were filled with a mixture of horror and disappointment. Her voice was as cold as a morgue. Spencer just closed a deal that will secure this family's future for the next 50 years. She said her words perfectly even. You come home with a gruesome story and a piece of metal. You call that sacrifice, Abigail. I call that a waste. A waste. My survival, the lives of my soldiers, the honor I had nearly died for it, was all just a poor investment in her eyes. Back in the hotel suite, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. A brigadier general in full dress uniform stood there, her eyes clear and cold. The hopeful 18-year-old girl was gone. The officer, desperate for her mother's approval, was gone. All that was left was a soldier. I carefully folded the newspaper clipping and tucked it into the inner pocket of my jacket, right over my heart. I would carry her declaration of war with me to the altar. Then, without a backward glance, I walked out of the room, leaving the Vera Wang gown gleaming in the silence, a beautiful hollow ghost of a daughter I was never meant to be. The door clicked shut behind me. The Washington National Cathedral rose before me, its limestone spires piercing the crisp autumn sky like a prayer. It was a place of power, of history, built to inspire awe. But as my car pulled up to the grand entrance, all I felt was the cold dread of a soldier approaching a battlefield. Black town cars and gleaming foreign sedans lined the curb, disgorging guests in a river of dark suits and jewel-toned dresses. This was my mother's army, and they were already assembled. When the driver opened my door, a hush fell over the chattering crowd on the steps. It wasn't a gradual silencing. It was a sudden, sharp cutoff, as if a switch had been flipped. Every head turned. I stepped out, the single star on each of my shoulders, catching the afternoon sun, and I felt their gazes land on me like physical blows. There were whispers quickly stifled. I saw Mrs. Albright, my mother's closest friend, abruptly turn her back to inspect a stained glass window with intense fascination. I saw a handshake between two banking executives freeze mid-motion. This was a new kind of warfare, one I hadn't been trained for. This was the public performance of my disgrace. In my mother's world, I wasn't a general. I was a scandal, a bizarre spectacle in a dark blue uniform who had inexplicably shown up to a bishop wedding. I kept my chin up my back straight and walked through the gauntlet of their judgment, each silent step an act of defiance. Inside the soaring vestibule, the air was cool and smelled of old stone and wax. Mike was waiting for me. He had seen the entire scene through the glass doors. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. He simply took my hand, his grip firm and steady, a silent anchor in the storm. Let them stare, he murmured, his voice low enough for only me to hear. They're looking at a general. His words weren't just comfort. They were a recalibration of reality. He reminded me of who I was not, who they wanted me to be. A discreet usher led me to a private antechamber, a small wood-paneled room where brides were meant to compose themselves. But my mother wasn't there for composure. She was there for a final confrontation. She stood in the center of the room like a statue carved from ice, her Chanel suit a testament to understated power, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't raise her voice. She never did. Her power lay in the chilling precision of her words. "There is still time to fix this, Abigail," she said, her voice a low hum of authority. "The dress is upstairs. I had it brought from the hotel. Do not turn this sacred place into a cheap circus to satisfy your adolescent rebellion. This is not a suggestion. It is a mother's final plea for her daughter to remember who she is." She framed it as a plea, but it was a command. She called my identity a circus, my career a rebellion. She stood there, casting herself as the righteous mother trying to save her lost child. For a moment, the 18-year-old girl inside me, the one who had craved her approval for so long, wanted to crumble. But she was gone. I looked my mother in the eye, my own voice just as calm, just as steady. "I know exactly who I am, Mother. I'm just sorry you don't." I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I stated a fact. It was a line drawn in the sand, a border she could no longer cross. I stepped past her, my mission clear: get to the altar. As I passed, her hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Her perfectly manicured nails dug slightly into the fabric of my sleeve. I stopped turning to face her. The anger in her eyes was gone, replaced by something far more unsettling, a cold, pitying certainty. "You will regret this." She whispered the words, not a threat, but a prophecy. It was the calm pronouncement of a queen who, having lost the battle, was now cursing the victor to a long and miserable reign. The chill of her words followed me as I walked away. The first notes of the organ swelled, vibrating through the stone floor. The great oak doors of the cathedral swung open, and a river of light poured into the nave. I stood at the threshold alone. My father had passed years ago, and I had refused my brother's half-hearted offer to walk me down the aisle. This was a journey I had to make by myself. I took the first step and then the next. The aisle stretched before me like a path between two warring nations. On my right sat the world of the bishops. It was a sea of silk pearls and barely concealed disdain. I saw faces I'd known my whole life, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and disapproval. Spencer sat in the front pew, his gaze fixed firmly on the polished tips of his shoes. And next to him was my mother, sitting ramrod straight, her expression a perfect mask of tragic disappointment. As I drew closer, I saw her shake her head, almost imperceptibly, at a friend across the aisle, a gesture that clearly said, "I tried. The girl is simply impossible." On my left sat my world. It was a smaller contingent, an island of discipline in the ocean of judgment. There were officers I had served with, soldiers whose lives I had held in my hands. They wore their own dress uniforms, their posture perfect, their faces unreadable. but for the quiet respect in their eyes. They weren't watching a spectacle. They were bearing witness. They were my honor guard. I kept my eyes fixed on Mike, waiting for me at the altar, my true north. But as I passed the front pew, I had to walk directly past my mother. She leaned towards Spencer, her voice a perfectly calculated whisper designed to carry just far enough to strike its target. "It looks ridiculous," she breathed the words, slicing through the holy music. All this for a piece of cloth and a title. A piece of cloth. A title. 15 years of sacrifice, of fear of leadership, of earning my place in a world that did everything to keep me out, all of it reduced to nothing in a single venomous whisper. For a heartbeat, my step faltered. The insult landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. But then I felt the folded newspaper clipping in my jacket pocket, a sharp reminder of the truth. I straightened my shoulders, corrected my step, and continued my march. The battle was over. She had fired her last shot. I reached the altar and stood beside Mike. He took my hand, and his warmth was an anchor. The priest smiled kindly and began the opening words. A tense quiet settled over the cathedral. The awkward part was over. The strange bride had made her strange entrance, and now a normal wedding could proceed. I could feel the collective exhale from my mother's side of the church. I glanced over and saw a small, smug smile playing on her lips. She had endured the embarrassment, and now she could preside over the rest of the day. She had won. The ceremony continued until the priest asked the traditional question that would change everything. But before he could finish, a new voice cut through the air. It came from a side entrance. A command sergeant major, his face, a road map of his long service, stepped into the main aisle. He ignored the priest, the guests, the bride and groom. He faced the congregation. His voice wasn't a yell, but it was a command of such pure, unadulterated authority that it cracked against the stone vaults like a rifle shot. "Unit, attention." The response was instantaneous and terrifying. A single explosive sound, crack, as 100 pairs of military boots slammed together on the marble floor. The guests from my mother's world flinched, gasping. They twisted in their seats to see what I already knew. Lining both sides of the cathedral, having filed in silently while all eyes were on me, stood 100 soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division in full dress uniform. They were statues of discipline. The sergeant major let the shock hang in the air for a beat. Then came the second command, sharper than the first. "Present. Arms." In a single fluid motion that was both beautiful and brutal, 100 M4 rifles were snapped up from their sides to the present arms position. The synchronized sound of hands slapping metal of stocks locking into place echoed through the sacred space, not a sound of violence, but a symphony of absolute respect. The civilians were stunned into silence. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a demonstration. It was a raw, undeniable display of a power they couldn't buy, inherit, or comprehend. My gaze found my mother. Her smug smile had vanished, replaced by a pale mask of disbelief. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The piece of cloth she had mocked was the uniform of an army. The title she had scorned was their commander. The world she had so carefully controlled, a world of whispers and reputations, had just been invaded and conquered by an army of warriors who stood in silent, unwavering loyalty to her daughter. The sergeant major turned to the priest, his posture relaxing slightly, his voice now calm and respectful. He gestured with his head toward the silent armed honor guard. "Sir?" he said. "We do." He gave a sharp, final nod to me. Part 2 ended there, on the side of my mother's perfectly constructed world, shattering into a million pieces. The reception at the Fort Myer Officers Club was a world bathed in warm light and the rich scent of old leather and bourbon. Where the cathedral had been a vault of cold stone and strained silence, this hall was alive. The sound of deep, genuine laughter echoed off the dark, wood-paneled walls, mingling with the clinking of glasses and the low hum of stories being told, stories of shared hardship and improbable survival. Portraits of decorated, unsmiling generals from decades past stared down from the walls, their stern gazes a stark contrast to the vibrant camaraderie that filled the room. This was not a place of judgment. It was a sanctuary. This was my home. And here, I was not an anomaly. I was the center, but not in the way a bride is typically the focus of attention. It wasn't my dress or my day. It was my world. General Davies, a man who had commanded armies and advised presidents, clapped me on the shoulder, his booming laugh shaking his chest. "Miller," he roared, "I knew you were trouble when you were just a damn captain. Knew you'd be sitting in my chair one day." We shared a laugh, an easy exchange between two people who understood the weight of the stars on their shoulders. A few moments later, a young sergeant named Eva Rostova, a woman I'd personally commended for her courage under fire, approached me with a shy, gap-toothed smile. "Ma'am," she said, her voice thick with emotion, I wanted to say thank you. For everything. We spoke for a few minutes about her family, her future. This was my reality. A web of relationships forged in loyalty and mutual respect, stretching from the highest echelons of power to the enlisted soldiers who were the very backbone of the army. Then, across the room, I saw them. In a lonely corner, arranged in a tight defensive cluster, were the last remnants of the Bishop contingent. My mother, my brother, and two of my mother's closest friends stood as if shipwrecked on a foreign shore. Their exquisitely tailored clothing, which would have commanded respect in any Georgetown salon, looked flimsy and theatrical here. Their polite, meaningless chatter about stock prices and summer homes died in the air, swallowed by the boisterous energy of the room. They were ghosts at this feast, haunting the edges of a life they could not comprehend. My brother Spencer looked completely adrift. I had only ever seen him in his element, commanding a boardroom, charming a dinner party, effortlessly the center of any universe he occupied. Here he was, nothing. He fidgeted with his silk tie, checked his phone for a signal that wasn't there, his eyes scanning the crowd for a familiar face and finding none. Soldiers and officers walked past their small, isolated island without a second glance, their conversations about deployments and duty flowing around them as if they were invisible statues. And in that moment, watching them, I didn't feel the sharp sting of triumph I might have expected. Instead, a hollow ache spread through my chest. It was the quiet grief for a family that had never been a sense of belonging I had stopped searching for in them long ago. After what felt like an eternity, Spencer broke away from the group. He navigated the room awkwardly, like a man walking on unstable ground, and finally stopped in front of me. He had to interrupt a story my command sergeant major was telling. For a moment, he just stood there, his mouth slightly open, the easy charm he always wielded now utterly gone. "Congratulations, Abby." He started the word, sounding stiff, and rehearsed. He took a shaky breath. I, uh, I wanted to say, I never understood all those years. The family dinners, you talking about your training, your promotions. I thought you were just trying to prove a point, to be difficult. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw, startling confusion. But in that church, when those soldiers stood up, I saw it. It's real. All of it. The way they look at you. He shook his head, a gesture of pure bewilderment. I always thought it was just a game. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. It wasn't an apology, but it was a surrender. A white flag raised over the battlefield of our childhood. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was admitting he'd been fighting in the wrong war all along. I looked at the brother I barely knew and felt the last embers of resentment die out. I gave him a slow final nod. I know, Spencer. The chatter in the hall quieted as Mike tapped a glass with a spoon. He stood in the center of the room, his smile radiating a warmth that filled the space. He raised his glass, his eyes finding mine and holding them. I'm not going to toast General Miller tonight, he began, and a few good-natured groans went through the room. Because I'm not married to her. I'm married to Abby. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the crowd. Many of you know her as a brilliant strategist, a commander you'd follow into hell. And you're right. But I want to tell you about the Abby I know. He told them about a night in a dusty command tent in the middle of a sandstorm. He'd found me at 0300 long, after everyone else was asleep. I wasn't studying maps or drafting orders. I was sitting with a single lamp carefully writing a letter. He told them how I'd spent 2 hours writing on behalf of a young private, a kid who had died in my arms that afternoon. Because I'd promised him I would tell his mom he wasn't scared. That's the Abby I married. Mike finished, his voice thick with emotion. Not the one who gives the orders, but the one who keeps the promises. Her strength isn't in the star on her shoulder. It's in the heart beating beneath it. Tears burned behind my eyes as the room erupted in applause. I looked across the hall and saw my mother standing near the doorway, her face unreadable. She had heard it all, a story of a daughter she had never met. A short time later, needing a breath of fresh air, I stepped out onto a stone balcony that overlooked the distant, glittering lights of Washington. The cool night air was a relief. The door opened and closed behind me. It was her. My mother's anger had been burned away in the fires of the cathedral. Now all that was left were the ashes. She stood beside me, clutching her pearl handbag as if it were a life raft. For a long moment she said nothing, simply staring out at the city. This is not how I envisioned your wedding, she finally said, her voice thin and brittle. The society pages were supposed to cover it. We were supposed to be in magazines. This is not the life I wanted for you. And then came the question, the one that proved she would never, ever understand. All those men, she whispered, her voice trembling with a frustration she could no longer contain, with guns in a church. What will people say? Abigail. What have you done to the bishop name? I turned to face her. The rage I had held onto for so long had dissolved, leaving behind only a vast, calm clarity. I looked at my mother, at this woman, whose approval I had once valued more than my own life, and I saw her for what she was, a frightened woman, terrified of a world she couldn't control, a prisoner in a cage of her own making. You're still asking the wrong questions, Mother? I said, my voice gentle but firm. This was never about the bishop name. It was about my honor, and They are two very different things. I didn't wait for a reply. I reached out and placed my hand on her arm for a single fleeting second. It wasn't a gesture of reconciliation. It was a gesture of release. Then I turned and walked back into the light and laughter of the reception, back to my husband, back to my life. When I returned, Mike wrapped his arm around me. A few minutes later, I glanced toward the corner where my family had been standing. It was empty. They had slipped away, their departure as quiet and inconsequential as a whisper in a thunderstorm. Their absence didn't leave a void. It created space. 5 years later, the memory of that day was no longer a fresh wound but a faded, silvery scar. From my corner office in the Pentagon, I could see the Washington Monument, a proud testament to the nation I had sworn to serve. On my desk, beside a piece of shrapnel from an IED encased in lucite, sat two framed photographs. The first was from my wedding. Mike and I were in the center, but the real subject was the joyous chaos surrounding us. 100 soldiers from the 101st, their formal discipline forgotten, were cheering, laughing, and hoisting us into the air. It was a picture of pure, unfiltered belonging. The second photo was of our daughter Lily on her 5th birthday. She was perched on my shoulders, her face alight with a fierce, determined smile so much like my own, a too large Army patrol cap sliding down over her eyes. The war with my family had ended in a long, quiet armistice. We exchanged meticulously polite cards on holidays. I'd see them once or twice a year at gatherings that were civil, sterile, and mercifully brief. My mother never spoke of the wedding again. She had not learned to understand my world, but she had learned that she held no power over it. She treated me with a distant, cautious respect, the kind one affords a foreign diplomat from a powerful but unsettling nation. I looked at the photos and thought about the word legacy. My mother had been obsessed with the Bishop legacy, a fragile thing built on stock portfolios and advantageous marriages. She'd fought so hard to protect a name while I had been fighting for a concept honor. I realized then that a legacy isn't a name you pass down. It's the values you build into the people you love. The Bishop legacy was a gilded cage. My legacy would be one of service strength and the quiet courage to be who you are. My desk phone chimed a soft, pleasant sound. It was Mike. "Hey, General," his voice teased. "Got a situation down here? Commander Lilly reports a critical ice cream deficiency and is requesting immediate reinforcement. Over." I smiled, a real deep smile that reached my eyes. "Roger that. Major Dad," I replied. "Tell Commander Lilly that Steelheart is on her way down to provide support." I gathered my things, my eyes lingering on the picture of my daughter one last time. I walked to the vast window, looking out over the sprawling city, over the memorials to those who had served and sacrificed. I had fought a war for my mother's approval and lost again and again. But in losing that war, I had won something far more valuable. I had won myself. And as I walked out of my office, leaving the weight of the past behind me, I walked toward the bright, joyful sound of my own family, finally and completely in command. They teach you that legacy is a name you inherit, a history passed down to you. But I learned that a name is just a word. A true legacy is the honor you live by. It's not defined by the family you were born into, but by the family you choose to build and fight for. Sometimes, the bravest battle you'll ever face is the one to define yourself on your own terms and to become the person you were meant to be. Thank you for being here and for listening to my story. If you've ever felt like family was both your safest place and your deepest wound, If you've ever been torn between walking away and holding on, or if you have ever felt profoundly unseen by the very people who should have known you best, or even if you've never experienced this but the story resonated with you, let us know you're here. Just comment yes below. Sometimes simply knowing you've been seen is the first step toward healing. Feel free to share your own experiences in this space, or just listen to the stories of others. Sometimes that's enough. I'll be here. We'll be here. And maybe this little corner of the internet can be a place where stories like ours find a home. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, healing takes time, but it's one you don't have to complete alone.